exhibitions. Iris Eichenberg, Bend. Iris is our head of metalsmithing here at the Academy. The Hall of Wonders, and Theater of the Mind. And Hans Rosenstrom is an artist as part of that exhibition. Hans Rosenstrom is a Finnish artist who currently lives in London. He graduated from the Finnish Academy of Fine Arts in Helsinki in 2007. Rosenstrom is primarily known for his immersive sound-based installations that have been exhibited extensively in Europe and worldwide, including Australia, Turkey, Chile, the United Arab Emirates, Russia, amongst others, where they have received critical acclaim and attention. He's had solo exhibitions at the Moderna Museet in Stockholm, the Helsinki City Museum, and Konstfabriken in Finland, and Helsinki Contemporary. He's also exhibited at the Palais de Tokyo, Momentum Biennial, and Bonniers Kunsthal, Chasma, amongst many others. His installation, A Dialogue from A to B, is part of the Theater of the Mind exhibition here at Cranbrook Art Museum and is artist's first site-specific commission here in America. His commission was supported by two very generous grants from the Finlandia National Foundation, based here in America, and Frame in Finland. So please help me welcome Hans Rosenstrom.
Well, thank you, Laura, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for the wonderful show. I'm very happy that I was invited to participate. Thank you, Greg, and the whole Cranbrook team. It's been wonderful to work with you. And actually, your presentation was it sounded so professional and so nice that now I actually regret a little bit of my choice, because I'm actually going to show you work from quite early on, because I thought that would actually give a understanding why I made certain decisions in my artistic practice. And so I'm going to start from really when I was a student. And there's going to be quite many images, and I'm going to talk along the way, basically. Yep. So actually, when I went to the academy, I started as a painter, but quite early on, I started to think that art or paintings were not actually the object himself, but it was actually more of an sort of a situation, that everything was always in a relationship with something else. And I became very, very interested in working in public spaces, outside the studio, basically. So I did a lot of different sort of interventions in different places. And a lot of this was also made possible because we did a lot of, many workshops in the school where I studied were actually joint programs with other European schools. So we got to travel to different cities and kind of in a short notice of time react and do different interventions. And I'm actually not going to show things in a chronological order, because I think my practice also has different threads. So I'm maybe a little bit more trying to just follow different threads, and then, yeah, we'll see where it goes. That's a performance in Istanbul. This is an action in Helsinki in 2003, which done a few weeks before the war in Iraq started, which at the time was marketed very much with words like just, meaning justified, but this is in Berlin. It's actually a remake or an appropriation of a very known graffiti in another area in Berlin, transformed as a neon sign to a shopping mall, basically. And this is a work in Iceland. Frelsi means freedom in Icelandic. So while I was doing this when I was studying, I of course also worked in the studio as well, and when it was time to have a graduation show, the exhibitions had to take place in gallery spaces. And I felt somehow problematic to transfer these sort of works as documentation into a gallery space. Because for me, it was always important that the work somehow was integrated in its surroundings, and the work would somehow deal with its relationship, what happens around the work. And so I kind of felt that it was a bit problematic for me actually to do something in a gallery space. But I solved it basically with starting to work with installations, like more immersive installations. So what for me, what felt important in a gallery space is, of course, the architectural surrounding, and then the other thing was viewer's presence, that the viewer is bodily there. And otherwise, gallery spaces are pretty neutral, and they don't. So all the other works earlier have been somehow dealing with the situation around them. So then I started to focus, for my graduation show, I thought that I would create something that would actually deal with the viewer's bodily presence in this moment, which later on became a very strong element in my work and my practice. So I basically built an endless space, or an illusion of an endless space. So you enter the work in a corridor, and this corridor makes a Z turn and becomes more and more narrow. All the light disappears, and you walk on a balcony. And this balcony is surrounded basically by a star sky, 360 degrees underneath and over you, which is super hard to document, to be honest. But it was done by sewing a fabric in a diamond shape stretched in the space, and then I melted with a tiny needle holes in it and lit it from the outside. But the whole fabric diamond was so big that it was probably 12 feet at least, in circle. So it was a very big space. And this led to other experiments with immateriality and viewer's presence in a moment. This is a mirror, basically a corridor that ends in a mirror, but the closer you walk to the mirror, the more your image disappears from the surface. This was also a time when I started to work with a technician, who I still work with, to enable I wouldn't call them interactive, but in some way, to enable the work to interact with the viewer. But they're always done unconsciously, so you don't need to be aware of these things. But at the same time, I was also continuing with, also working outside the gallery space whenever I got the chance. This is a drawing in snow made in Spain, and this is a video in East Turkey. I actually have to tell a little bit of this work. I did a 3-month residency in Istanbul, and during that time I encountered basically a newspaper magazine, an article talking about a city in East Turkey called Hasankeyf. And Hasankeyf is one of the oldest inhabited places in the world, or cities, that has been continuously inhabited. And it's by the river Tigris, which is also culturally the place where agriculture and the society as we know it has born. And and this article was about that they're building a huge dam that will submerge the city and all the cultural elements. That this is an old Roman bridge, for example. And I very much wanted to do something with this. So I knew quite early on that I don't want to make a documentary, I don't want to make something very literal. So I built a raft that was made, or raft for a tripod for a camera, built out of a life ring, which was placed in the river so it floated freely. And somehow the current of the river decided how it would turn and what it would film, and eventually how it would portray the landscape it has created. And Hasankeyf is also a modern city, so there are like modern infrastructure, but then there's also like old caves where people have lived. And it's a 1 hour long journey where the camera pans through this landscape. So during these times, I've also experimented a lot with sound. And nowadays I'm often labeled as a sound artist, but I really don't sign that, because I think I work much more spatially and much more in relation to the experience, the body that experiences the work. But around 2005, I started to experiment with binaural recordings. And I had some ideas what I wanted to do with it, but I hadn't really figured out a way to actually reach the things I wanted to say with the work. But this work, done 2009, called Mikado, was probably the kind of turning point for me. Can you hear me well? So this is a sound installation for a single viewer, and in many ways a starting point for also the work that's possible to experience here at Cranbrook. This, however, it's based on a script by Ingmar Bergman, so it's basically a reenacted scene from a movie that you can experience, and in the end you actually become part of the work. And pretty much this is what happens. You enter the room alone. You would find a dressing table with headphones that kind of lures you to walk towards it. When you sit down, the work automatically starts, and the light shifts in the space, which also means that when you look at yourself in a mirror, the room disappears where you are, and it's only lights up your face. And I guess this work is quite theatrical, and it was very much, even though it was done in a gallery, first time a lot of theater people experienced it very strongly, and I got a lot of invitations for theater festivals. And for me it was important, so for example, I've done this in a lot of different places, but I always do it with a local language, with a local actor, because it was very important for me that the text that they hear, that it's something that they just understand, and it goes into them. It's nothing they have to translate in their mind. So I very much refused to work with English, for example, which would have been a common language for everyone. But there's also a technical element to this. They're always recorded on site, and this means that they also, it's of course much easier to find people who are good people to work with if they can work with their own language. But it creates very interesting situations for me and these persons, because often it's languages I don't have no understanding of. And during these processes when we record, I often have to trust this person who delivers the text very much. And these situations I enjoy a lot, to be honest. And it's the same work, but this is a vacant building in Riga in Latvia. This is actually a church in Holland, same work. And I always try to mask the work so that they would fit the surrounding, so that the table, for example, somehow feels that it's part of the room. And here I can also see parallels to the earlier works, where I try to create interventions in public spaces, for example, but try to do it in a way that it feels that they could belong to the space. But as I was doing these sort of sound installations, I also, of course, started to think about the script, and what if the script would be more site-specific? What if the script would relate more to the circumstances of the actual experience? So I also started to write my own scripts, which has been a very interesting journey, because writing is definitely nothing that I find easy. And one of the first ones was in Gothenburg, in Sweden, where I was invited to an exhibition called Street View. And the exhibition took place on one avenue in Gothenburg, in different locations. A lot of the works were outside, but I was invited to, or we found a space basically that had just gone bankrupt, unfortunately, and we could make a work in this. It's actually a chocolatier's shop with a cafeteria, and it of course gave a lot of possibilities for writing, because a space that suddenly loses its meaning is a very sad and beautiful thing. So I wrote a script around this sort of identity crisis of this space. And it's also a sound installation for one person. And unfortunately, I'm not going to play any of these sounds for you, because they are so specifically made for headphones. But luckily, there is a work upstairs that if you have the chance, you can, or if you have the time, you can go and listen to that one. And I'm going to come there soon, but I'll see that work as well. And for me, it's always, I very much enjoy this sort of twisting a little bit the reality in spaces. So it's been very interesting to work with lights as well. So when you listen to a work, it often evolves, and lights maybe change for a second, or it's another kind of sound installation. So of course also have to think about making work for one person at a time is sometimes a little bit tricky, and it needs some sort of guidance, and if you don't have a guard, what do you do that tells you like someone is in there, please wait for your turn, you can go now. But there are a lot of spaces that you can't actually guard. So one of my kind of ways of dealing with the situation has been to, for example, create corridors that lead to works. And I like the journey to a work. I like that you have to walk through something to reach it, which was also basically in this work already, that you enter a first room, but that's more dark, and there's lights shining behind somewhere that kind of lures you to walk further and go deeper into the work. But these corridors have also become very good ways to actually control the flow of people, because if you can control the lights in the corridor, you can also kind of control if anyone wants to enter. So often these have been triggered with sensors, so when someone goes in, the corridor gets dark, and then when they go out, it gets light again. And so this was actually the work at Moderna Museet. And I guess in this work I had reached kind of a culmination of the sort of script writing I've been dealing with. And I think that with that I mean that the scripts that I wrote weren't any more stories, but they were more of enhancing or dealing with the actual situation where you're in. So they're not describing a story that you listen to, but they actually describe the situation where you are, and somehow from there tries to make you become a part of it. And I feel strongly, I think that for me art, like what I'm interested in is sort of creating situations where the viewer basically encounters themselves. So instead of looking at an object, or you would actually look inside into your own body in this moment. And to come to this point, or to gain access to these things, I think I use a lot of, for example, illusion and things that somehow tests your test your senses or your sensory understanding of your surrounding. And it's also interesting, senses in itself is an interesting thing, because that's how we interpret reality around us. It is through senses, but it's always an interpretation. that happens in our minds. And that's one reason why sound became also so interesting, because it is so intimate, and it's also something that goes into you, and it's also very something that disappears, like it's not there. You can't go back to it. You just hear it once, and then you embody it for a second, and it's gone. And so this work had a very elaborate lighting system. So when you sat down, first like the ceiling lights went off lighting only with one light, and then later there was a hidden spotlight that would light up your own shadow in the space. That was then eaten up by all the shadows of the surrounding, and it was gone, and the lights went back on. But I very much enjoyed this sort of journey from walking through the corridor, finding the headphones. And I think this journey is often like, it's some way stating that the work kind of deals with you, your body. So this is similar work, but in a hotel room, which I actually love this sort of setting where you come into a hotel, you go to the reception, you get a key, and then you have to find the room. And then when you find the room, you enter the room, but you don't really kind of know what's in the room, what's going to happen. This was in a festival in Austria, in Graz. And I remake also work. So this work was done again in a festival in Iceland, which Laura saw. That was also in a hotel room. But the installation was very different then. Then this work you could see yourself from behind in a mirror. And in the other work there was kind of it was done in 2 rooms. And it kind of, installed in a way that when you enter the room, that you kind of felt that there could have been a mirror. This is a work in the Italian Culture Institute in Stockholm on a theater stage. It's also for one person. I think chairs also represent something for me. Empty chairs is always they have a meaning. But then at the same time, when I did a lot of work for one person at a time, it felt very limiting. And I felt that I also wanted to create works for more people that would actually deal with these situations, like how do you share a space together with another actual spectator or a viewer. So at the same time when I was doing these works for one person, I also started to do works for more people. So this is, for example, a work for three viewers. It's in a festival in Finland. And here also, when you were listening to the work, the lights kind of just the darkness kind of was creeping in on you. And when the work was finishing, it was that you were only sitting sharing this sort of one light spot together. And basically here the idea was that everyone, or all of these 3 people, would hear a story, kind of a narration that happens between the 2 other listeners. So it's recorded in a way that when you sit and listen to this, it sounds that the 2 other listeners are actually talking or telling you a story. And it's the same thing for all these 3 people, but then it's a different story for everyone. And this is in a museum, work for 2 people. And then the more I've done work, the kind of more possibilities I've suddenly got my hands on. And then a few years back I got this big tower in Norway that I was allowed to do basically what I wanted with, though they had a lot of restrictions. But so I wasn't allowed to actually hang anything, no one's going to guard it. It's an open space by a highway, but you can do what you want, kind of. But I triggered like different floors. It's a 9-floor building. It doesn't have any purpose, except that it's a kind of a memorial building for a landscape, or the cultural history of this landscape. And in Norway they have a lot of money, so they can build this sort of architectural monstrosities by highways, which without any purpose except you can go in there and look at the landscape. But it also, for me it actually worked very well, since I've so much been trying to do this sort of works that relate to your physical presence, and when you have a building that's actually doesn't have a purpose except you being there, it was actually a very good starting point for writing and for doing a work. And what this also enabled, which was a new thing for me, was to think about the works more in a structure of a journey. So there's like a lot of this one had 3 different parts in different floors, but create like sort of a narrative from one floor to another that enters deeper into the building. So this is the view from the upper floor, for example, and here was for example, how I imagine is that people enter the building, it's 9 floors, okay, they take the elevator. So this is on the 9th floor, and my logic tells that this is the first thing they experience, because they're not going to walk up 9 floors, and they walk down rather. So for this, the script I wrote for this work, for example, deals with how blood cells travel in the human body. And pretty much my aim was that when you stand and look outside from the window, you see the cars, you see the highways, and you kind of think about how the roads take over the landscape, how they kind of, they continue over the horizon and they go everywhere. And at the same time, think like relating this idea to how blood veins cover your whole body. And while you're listening to this, very much I try to create this situation that you would become super aware of like every single, like your skin, your fingers, everything, to really make you bodily present. And that was the starting point for this work. And then you went longer in or deeper down to the building, and you encountered different works. And here I also used speakers in one work, which was a new thing for me. And I found this sort of hypersonic speakers that you can see underneath the balcony. These plates, white plates, they don't look like much, but they actually project sound in a different wavelength. So you don't hear the sound from the speaker, but you hear it from the reflection. So when you entered this space, the sound would kind of be streamed from the wall towards you. And in this case, it was basically anecdotes about time. The story started basically with concrete creep, which is this thing that happens inside concrete because of the metal bars inside, and that all the infrastructure that we have built in this world nowadays is planned to last around 100 years because of this creep that happens inside them. And things that are very solid and we take for granted are actually also things that are not actually very solid in the long run. But then the text went on to talk about different aspects of time and life. And which leads me to this work, which is called In Good Faith. It's from 2013. And from the speaker you will hear a reading of the Declaration of Human Rights that was written in 1948 by the United Nations, or by a group of people that were invited by the United Nations. And this was, of course, the time after the Great War, and I think a lot of distress, or a lot of things that happened that made people to think that how can we continue? And the Declaration of Human Rights is a very beautiful view on how everyone should be equal and treated equally no matter what. And we all know that this is of course not true, or this is an utopian idea that's not going to happen, because we also, in order for this to happen, would also need that someone would control this, like a global police. So I made a work where this speaker reads out the Declaration of Human Rights, and the microphone simultaneously records that, but at the same time the microphone records the echo of the space and the presence of the viewers who listen to the work. So the next time it will play the Declaration of Human Rights, it will be layered with the actual real space where it's in and with the presence of the people who inhabit the space at the time. And then this goes on and on and on until the work transforms to until the meaning of the words and the meaning of the content changes or disappears. And so when I was about to show, or I was gonna, or when I got the chance to show this work in a gallery space, I of course started to think about, like, also what could I add to this, and because often it's in this practice it goes the way that you're invited somewhere and you get a room and then they tell you that you can do whatever or show that work, but then this declaration in itself, it felt that I also want to do something more with the room. Because I also wanted to somehow bring the viewer's bodily presence more closely involved with this. So I cut out a piece of a wall and created basically an obstacle in the entrance. So something that you would have to relate to when you go in. And I very much enjoyed the idea of creating this obstacle of the physical, of the real space, but at the same time also making it as a coulisse, like a facade. And that's the entrance. And this is an image from the Italian Culture Institute where I had previously made a work in. But this is also on this stage actually Pasolini gave his last public presentation of his poems before he was brutally murdered. So all this somehow, all the works for me deal with or dealt with speech or language and the body. We're in time. We are still on time. This is a huge work in a museum in Finland with 5 different kind of points. So it was kind of a very big journey for a viewer. That starts from this balcony where you look down. And here I actually commissioned 2 writers to write the scripts. Because I felt that I very much wanted to do a work that would deal with how we look at someone who looks back at us, and do this from different angles in the space. It also felt that if I write everything, all the different angles will also sound the same, and they will have the same content. And it was very interesting to actually involve other people in the writing process, and also losing control of what the content is, because of course by doing that, open the content for different possibilities. But it's also very difficult. Yeah, here you could actually enter also inside the curtain, and there was a small space inside. Now I start to feel that I maybe took too many pictures. This is a work from Sweden, another sort of journey in a building. And it's actually very rare in Sweden where you would have this sort of vacant houses in downtown areas. This is in Norrköping, where I were commissioned to do works on 3 floors. And one of the floors was this sort of old office kind of building. The work is called to unfold, and it's very simple, simply placing mirrors in some of these openings, folding out the space, and therefore also creating new or other angles of experiencing a room. And then you could, from here you could go upstairs, and the space looked totally different. And this is all like, only thing I added was basically the lights. So all these walls were smashed by someone else, or they belong to the building. And in here I used the same technique as I had used earlier with the speakers. So I had hidden speakers in different places that were started by sensors, and a similar storyline with anecdotes dealing with time. And then there was one more floor, and this was a sound installation for one person. I'm showing this basically also, I guess because at some point it's also interesting to remake similar work that you've done before in new environments and see how they can be like refigured. So this is actually the story from in Moderna Museet that was in a museum context, and now it's in a burnt kind of, I think it was someone's home actually, but at some point it had burned down. From there to here, this is a work for Bonniers Konsthall in an exhibition called Art of Memory. And I guess at this time, people in Sweden had raised certain expectations what they could ask me to do. So I was commissioned to make a work. They had a very ambitious idea of wanting to include 7 different museums into their exhibition. And they wanted me to do a work that would somehow connect these places to each other. So I was basically asked, well, could you do something that could be listened from headphones, downloaded from the internet, and would connect all these 7 spaces? Thank you. We're not going to pay you. But of course I did something, but I didn't want to do all the 7 places, but I selected 2 spaces, and then I found one space myself that I thought that would be relevant, and that space was this park. The exhibition dealt with memory, and my work was experienced in a park, in a museum, and in a library. And I wrote 3 short texts that dealt with what these different places maybe, how they could be seen, or how they relate to memory, or creation of memory. So this is from the park, this is the museum, and this is the library. In the library, for example, I worked with a choir, so we had a big choir inside the library, singing basically a shepherd's stone, which is a sound curve illusion of either going down like endlessly or going up endlessly. And you can listen to it from headphones in this one space. And this is the last work I'm going to show. It's from the exhibition last summer, and this is from Helsinki Contemporary, a commercial gallery in Helsinki, and it was the first major exhibition in a commercial gallery that I was invited for. And my first idea was, of course, that I don't want to bring any physical work to the gallery. So I really want to work with the opportunities in the space, or somehow you create something from the possibilities that exist in this space. And this space is notoriously known of its lighting, and it has very, very bright lights. And we took down all the lights, raised them or lowered them into the space, and therefore somehow creating a tension between the person in the space and the kind of, well, the lights or the things in the space. But this exhibition actually continues, so when you walk around the corner, the gallery guard that used to sit around here, that the entrance is by the red wall, and there's usually a guard that sits here, but I very specifically asked them to go, like, not sit here, because the reading of the space would immediately be different if there's if there is a person behind the desk and kind of welcoming you in. So I changed the place of this person, and she would actually be by the back door of the gallery that leads to the offices. And in the offices, the exhibition actually continued, but in this case, again, that was for one person at a time. But this was actually the first time where I made the separation of, or the act of separating the viewers and letting just one person enter. So I made the separation itself as a kind of a performative act. So the gallery guard would actually separate you from your friends, for example. But this was also a separation between the spaces. So there's the gallery space that comes with its own history and own interpretation. And when you enter basically a working office space as a viewer, that immediately means something else. And you're more, I guess, more of a guest, and you're much more of probably a little bit more unsure what's part of the art, what's not. But I had made all the things that were there were basically about part of the exhibition, and somehow dealt with different sort of separations or different sort of lines. So these are they're called lettres, drawings. Like, this one says exclude, divide. Small video. I don't really have maybe so much time to go into this work, because it's also part of a very different thing I was doing in Norway, but it's basically a video of a glacial ice that's 400 or 500 years old, and how that interacts with a body heat or meets a human. And then in the back room there was a sound installation, which again was very similar to the script I had written to the Moderna Museet for a few years earlier, but this time it was made in Finnish. I often work with actors, and mainly because it's very easy to work with people who know how to speak clearly and know how to deliver. And the person in this case was actually a girl actor, or female, and I've worked with her actually many times. And she's almost like my alter ego, which is quite funny. And behind the listener there was this one photograph, and this photograph is actually an enclosed opening that was actually taken from the gallery space by the entrance. So it can also create this loop or a circle. Goes back to the beginning. So this is from Cranbrook Art Museum, from the upstairs. Finally, thanks for bearing with me. I thought that it's very, in a way, maybe my introduction was a bit too long, but I thought it was a good thing to kind of, to go through works to somehow, because they do have a thread. They follow a certain thread or a certain line. And Laura invited me to Cranbrook maybe a year ago almost, and she said that it would be really nice if I could do or think about something for Cranbrook. And then she also sent this long introduction of what Cranbrook is. And in this introduction I saw the name of Eliel Saarinen, who apparently was a big figure here, I realized. And it was quite weird, because my great-grandfather, in my family there's a story that my great-grandfather asks his wife that, do you want to move to America with Elia Saarinen? And his wife says, no, who would take care of the garden? And the wife and 3 children stays in Finland, and my great-grandfather moves to America. And he worked for Saarinen before, so this is totally plausible. But at the same time, this is the only thing I knew. And when I got this invitation of Laura and I saw Elia Saarinen, I was like, maybe my great-grandfather came here maybe for 90 years ago. I have to look a bit closer to this. And we have at home we had this sort of these are things that these are things that my great-grandfather made. And for example, from a model this is the real model. It's a model of an area of Helsinki that was unfortunately never built, but it was planned by Elia Saarinen. So my great-grandfather was a carpenter, and this carpentry, or this wood workshop, was next to where Eliel had his studio, so they probably helped out a lot with building stuff. This is from the home of Eliel Saarinen in Finland, and for example, this rug in the back was given from Loja Saarinen to my great-grandmother, who's this person, and that's her with Eero Saarinen. So I had all these kind of traces in our family that, but no one really knew, everyone just said that, he went to America and he worked there for Saarinen. So when I came here, I was really optimistically trying to find traces from him. And the funny thing is, we found, with Leslie, the help of Leslie, we found an image from the Saarinen family album taken here from the Greek theater in 1928 that has his name written on it. But that was the only thing we found. We didn't find any records of him working here, anything. With Leslie, we then found times when he entered America. So I knew that he came, I think 17th of July in 1922. But then this story became funny or weird. Elia Saarinen actually came a half year later to America. And according to the history books here, or the idea why Saarinen came here is because he had entered a competition in Chicago, and his entry was so successful that he kind of figured out that there's a lot of opportunities in the States. But the competition wasn't launched before my great-grandfather had already decided to move, or already had moved. So, of course, history, it's very difficult to know, this sort of why things have happened in the past, or what had led to different decisions that people make. So I live in London, I don't live in Finland, and my great-grandfather died in 1940s, so my dad has never seen him. But there are some pictures of him. So then I traveled to Finland, and I went to my dad's sister's archives, and then I eventually found a picture of him and realized that it's not the same person as the person in the Cranbrook. So, which made the story even more interesting in some ways, is that someone has been going through Saarinen's family album and labeled a person as my great-grandfather who is not that person. So this is him, and I realized that it has New York plates, so he most likely never came, probably at least wasn't working here. And so I used all this material to make a work for the museum. But I had this is maybe the difficult part in my practice, is also I had gone very far with writing scripts that deal with actual situations where you're in, and suddenly I got this thread or this possibility of thinking about something different. But then I had this working method of doing these sort of binaural recordings for headphones for one person at a time, and I think Laura very much wanted me to do something with this. But it was very difficult actually to have this storyline that's obviously it really wants to. I really want to tell this story, but how to make a story that would actually not just be a story that you listen to, but create a situation where that would somehow involve you, or touch you, or be somehow meaningful for the viewer. And that's pretty much what I tried to do here at Cranbrook. And then you can go upstairs and see if it was successful. Yeah, I guess, thank you. I can, yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to, or I'll give my best answer. But this is probably my talk. Thank you.